Hello, my name is Randall Nickel, Executive Director, Student Life at Augustana. I hope that the first few days as a university student have gone well for you and that you're settling into your first-year seminar classes. I'm here today to welcome you to the first in a series of important conversations, activities, and events that we call the Orientation Passport. I'm pleased to introduce you to Dr. Keith Edwards, who is here for the 5th year in a row to present Creating a Culture of Consent. Dr. Edwards has over 15 years' experience working on important issues like sexual violence prevention, men's identity, and social justice issues, and has presented at over 100 university campuses across Canada and the United States, written multiple chapters and books, and was recently on the Presidential Task Force on Sexual Violence Prevention in Higher Education. Before working as a consultant and speaker, Dr. Edwards was the Director of Campus Life at Macalester College in St. Paul, Minnesota for 8 years. He now works full-time to learn, create, and contribute to addressing complex problems, including addressing sexual violence in higher education. For some of you, this is a topic that you've never heard talked openly about before. For some of you, this may be a topic that is very difficult to talk about. If so, I want to let you know that we have a range of services available for you, both online and on campus. Please do not hesitate to reach out to access any of those services. So please welcome Dr. Keith Edwards.
Thank you, Randall, for the introduction, your leadership in general, and your commitment to students specifically. Welcome to the University of Alberta at Augustana. I wish I could be there with you in person in Camrose, but not this year. Instead, we will share with you a previously recorded talk before a live audience. You might notice that this talk was done in the US, where I live. I want to reassure you that every statistic and study that I mentioned is also reflective of the research done in Canada. I also want to clarify that although there are differences in laws between US and Canada, all of the laws related to sexual violence that I mentioned are reflective of the legal standards in both countries. Thank you for your attention on this important topic, and more importantly, thank you for your leadership in your communities. I look forward to seeing you in person next year.
It's wonderful to be here. I've been working on college campuses for more than 20 years, and what I know, how many of you are students? Great. So here's what I know. College will change you for the rest of your life. I promise. When you leave here, you will not be the same person as when you arrived here, and that's a great thing. I have no idea how you're going to change, how you're going to transform, how you're going to grow, but it'll be because of the courses you take, the friends you make, the experiences you have, and the meaning you make of those experiences while your time here. And it'll be different for each and every one of you. But what we need to do is create a community, create a culture here that lets every single one of you do that in a way that lets you flourish. We're not here to create a culture and a community that is safe. We're aiming much higher than that. We want a place where you not just can survive, but you can thrive, you can grow, and you can transform. And what I'm going to talk about today is how we do that around the culture of consent and how we prevent sexual violence. But what I'm going to talk about, I think you'll find will apply to many, many different aspects, and how we're going to create a culture here on this campus, and then how you can create a culture in the communities you'll be a part of for the rest of your life that makes it not just safe, not just free of sexual violence, but a place where every single one of us can thrive, connect, be authentic, be genuine, and grow and transform. Because while college will transform you, so will be the rest of your life. So I'm here to talk particularly about how we do this around sexual violence. I want to be clear about those terms, sexual violence. Sexual violence is a broad umbrella term that includes sexual harassment, sexual assault, rape, and also stalking and intimate partner violence. The media oftentimes uses some of those terms interchangeably, which is sometimes sloppy, sometimes inaccurate, and can oftentimes be confusing. So I want to be clear about these definitions. When we're talking about sexual violence, that includes harassment, assault, and rape. Words or gestures of a sexual nature that are unwanted is sexual harassment. Words or gestures that are unwanted is sexual harassment. Touching of a sexual nature of the penis, breast, buttocks, or vagina, or clothing covering those areas, is sexual assault. So any touching of a sexual nature is sexual assault. And any penetration without consent is rape. And so sexual violence is this broad umbrella term, and you might hear about sexual assault that happens on another campus or happens on this campus, and you might think that must be a violent, aggressive rape, and it may be. It could also be something as simple as someone grabbing someone's body at a dance without their permission, which is absolutely sexual assault. So we have to be clear that sexual assault and sexual violence is on a continuum. And for our purposes today, I'm going to talk about that continuum, from words or gestures to touching to rape and penetration. So we're going to talk about all of that as we talk about this, right? Now, when we think about sexual violence, how many of you, by those definitions I just gave, raise your hand if you know someone who's experienced sexual violence? Look around the room. About 75% of you just raised your hand. And I see this again and again and again on every college campus that I go to. 75% of you already know someone who has experienced sexual violence. And it's probably a little disturbing to see that many of you know someone who's experienced sexual violence. Maybe it's you, maybe it's someone at home, maybe it's someone you care about, maybe it's someone sitting on the other side of the auditorium. But most of us don't think it's that common because the person who told us very personally, very directly, very privately. But to see that 75% of you already know someone who's experienced sexual violence shows us how common this is. And if I were to ask you honestly, I'm not asking you to raise your hand to this, but if I were to ask you honestly, how many of you have already experienced sexual violence? About 25% of you would raise your hand. Right? So this is not hypothetical, this is not someday, this is not somewhere. This is a very real thing for the people who are sitting here in these seats, whether it's happened to you or someone you know. And I'll just tell you, if you didn't raise your hand and no one has told you they've experienced sexual violence, it's not that you don't know anybody who's experienced sexual violence. I promise you, you do. They just haven't told you yet. So we have to be clear about this. And because sexual violence is so common, we all need to know how to help, support, and not do harm to survivors of sexual violence when they come tell us. And very rarely do survivors come and say, I've experienced sexual violence. They come to us and say, can I talk to you? Something happened to me, and I don't know what to make of it. Or I'm realizing that something happened may not have been okay. Can I talk with you about that? And when they come to you, we want to help them. We want to not do harm with them. So I want to show you a few quick things that you can do if someone comes to you and says they've experienced sexual violence, right? These are four tips about how we can support survivors. The first thing I want you to do is make sure that they're safe. Are they injured? Do they need medical attention? Is the person who harmed them where they live? Do they need to find someplace else to stay? Are they physically safe? Once you make sure that they're physically safe, then the next thing to do is believe them. Just believe them. Just believe them. False reports of sexual violence are exceedingly rare. According to the FBI, it's about 5%, which is the same amount of false reports of someone reporting that someone stole their car when nobody stole their car. We're not terribly concerned about that, right? Now, the media oftentimes portrays this in ways that leads us to believe that there are false reports when that's not always really what happened, right? But it is not your job if someone says, hey, I think I experienced sexual violence. It's not your job to investigate that. It's not your job to gather information. It's not your job to adjudicate. It's not your job to do that. Someone else will get that job. Let them do it. But if someone comes to you and discloses that, just believe them. The third thing I want you to do is I want you to say these words, it is not your fault. 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 If someone's telling you about how they experienced sexual violence and you feel like you're just saying that over and over and being really redundant, you're doing a great job. Our culture victim blames survivors of sexual assault based on the messages that we get before the assault happens, after. And usually the first person to blame themselves for what they've experienced is the survivor themselves. We all want to believe we live in a just and fair world where bad things don't happen to good people. We have a cognitive desire to do that. And so when bad things happen to other people or to us, we want to believe if I just don't do those things, then I don't have to worry about that. Right? You read on the news that something awful, someone had their wallet stolen and were mugged at 4 o'clock in the morning, and you think, oh, that's awful. And then your next thought is, well, I'd never be out at 4 o'clock in the morning. Right? So you just think, that's awful, I don't want to be afraid, I would never do that. Okay, I can go about my life. Right? And if you've experienced sexual violence, something horrible has happened to you. And usually the first thing we want to do is make sure that that won't happen again. So we just think, well, if I just did A, B, and C, if I don't do A, B, and C again, then I'll be okay. And that's how we blame ourselves for the sexual violence that happens. And so if you say, it's not your fault, it's not your fault, or it's not your fault, you may feel like you're being repetitive and redundant, but survivors can't hear that enough. No one is responsible for the sexual violence that someone else perpetrates on them. Ever, period, no exceptions. The final thing I want you to do is empower those who have experienced sexual violence. Help them make choices and decisions about what happens to them. This can be really hard when we particularly love and care about the person who's experienced sexual violence, and we think we know what's best for them. We think you need to go to the hospital, you need to file a report, you need to talk with someone in the counseling center. And those are good suggestions, but don't make decisions for that person. Let them make decisions. Empower them to do that. Someone who has experienced sexual violence has had their choices and their decisions taken away from them. You don't want, in the effort to help them, to do the same thing. So someone who's experienced sexual violence, make sure that they're empowered to make choices about how they recover and how they heal and how they handle what happens after the assault. Don't take choices away from them. You might suggest, you might recommend, you might repeatedly suggest things, but let them make those decisions. So these are 4 things that I want you to do if anyone ever comes to you and says, I've experienced sexual violence, or you think that's going to happen. Make sure they're safe, believe them, it's not your fault, and empower them to make choices. Does that make sense? All right. So as we talk about sexual violence, we've talked about definitions and what sexual violence is, and we've also talked about how you can support someone who's experienced sexual violence. I now want to talk about how we've talked about sexual violence on campuses and in society in general for really the past 40 years. We have talked about sexual violence as a women's issue. There's a couple good reasons for that and a couple of really bad reasons for that. The good reason for that is that for the past 40 years, the work to understand, recognize, address, and prevent sexual violence has been done overwhelmingly by women. We owe a great debt of gratitude to the individual women and women's organizations and feminist groups that have put laws on the books, resources in place, and shelters in existence. They have done the vast, vast, vast majority of the work, and we owe them a great debt of gratitude for what is in place today. We have also talked about sexual violence as a women's issue because we know sexual violence happens to women, and it does. It also happens to men, and it also happens to trans and gender nonconforming folks. Sexual violence can happen across gender. What we also know is those who experience oppression experience even greater rates of sexual violence, and particularly people of color, working class folks, gay, lesbian, and queer folks, just to name a few. And although sexual violence can happen across gender, we know the perpetrators of sexual violence are overwhelmingly men. When men are the victims of sexual violence, men are overwhelmingly the perpetrators. When women are the victims of sexual violence, men are overwhelmingly the perpetrators. And when trans folks are the victims of sexual violence, men are overwhelmingly the perpetrators. It is also not a great way to address a problem that challenges us as a society. We don't take this approach, it happens to women, and so women need to figure it out. We don't take that approach with anything else we address effectively, right? If there are an epidemic in this area of drunk drivers hitting and injuring and killing pedestrians, we wouldn't respond by having presentations about how to walk across the street. That wouldn't make any sense. That'd be a really stupid idea, right? But for really the past 40 years, our approach to sexual violence that happens to women is telling women how to respond to that sexual violence being a reality. Raise your hand if you've ever heard messages directed, particularly at women and girls, like this. Don't walk alone at night. Don't go with your friends, come home with your friends. Don't wear that. Don't drink too much. Watch your drink. Raise your hand if you've ever heard any of these messages. I've never been anywhere where we haven't all heard those messages. Those messages are out there. They're being heard. You may not all be following those messages, but you've heard them. And women tell me, I've been hearing those messages since I was in the 7th grade. Those messages are out there. What those messages really say is, hey, we know rape's going to happen here. Here's how you women need to figure that out and how you need to deal with that. We have to do better than that. That's not going to work. So I would argue that the reasons we've thought about sexual violence as a women's issue is because women have done the lion's share of the work, and that's a good reason. But it also is not inclusive because sexual violence happens to women, it also happens to people of all genders. And it's also not a great approach because it's purely reactive. I would argue because men are overwhelmingly the perpetrators of all forms of sexual violence that we need to shift our thinking and start thinking about sexual violence as a men's issue. Now that can be hard for us to hear, particularly those of us who are men. When I first heard that sexual violence was a men's issue, I was really defensive, and I was really frustrated, and I was really angry. But then what I realized is that sexual violence as a men's issue is really empowering to me as a man. If sexual violence is a women's issue, there's not really a role for me to play in that. All I can really do is cross my fingers and hope it doesn't happen to people who I care about. But when sexual violence is a men's issue, now there's so much that I can do. I can think about my own behavior and my own choices and make sure I'm not perpetrating sexual violence. I can challenge my men who are my friends and challenge their behavior and help educate them. I can join with people of all genders to speak out and create a culture of consent, to create a community where sexual violence is unacceptable, where sexual violence is rare, and hopefully where sexual violence doesn't exist. Now there's so much that I can do as a man. So to think about sexual violence as a men's issue, I find very empowering, and we can all be part of the solution if we think about sexual violence as a men's issue. This challenges us to be not just reactive. Those messages that we have about don't walk alone at night, those are purely reactive. And they're necessary because we do live in an environment where sexual violence does happen. But that can't be the only message. We need to add to these reactive messages a proactive approach. And a proactive approach means prevention. Those reactive messages don't prevent sexual violence. It just says, I don't want it to happen to you. It doesn't prevent it from happening. It's going to happen to somebody else. I just want to protect you. We want to be proactive and prevent sexual violence from happening to anyone, period. If we're going to be proactive and talk about prevention, we really have to understand the dynamics of sexual violence and who the perpetrators are and how we can reach them. Right? So the dynamics of sexual violence is that 1 in 4 college women report surviving sexual assault or attempted sexual assault. Now, for many of you, this is obvious in the reality of the world that you live in. For many of you, this is shocking and you don't believe it. When I arrived at college and I heard this number, it was shocking and I didn't believe it. Before I came to college, I thought rape and sexual violence was this horrible, awful, tragic thing that would happen once or twice a year. I'd hear about it on the local news. Like murder. Tragic, horrible, pretty rare. When I arrived at college and realized that 1 in 4 college women report surviving sexual assault or attempted sexual assault, I didn't believe it. And if you don't believe it, you might begin to explain it away in a few ways. And I want to talk about some of the ways we start to explain this away. You might begin by explaining it away. Say, that's just some statistic, probably done in the dark ages by some left-wing radical feminist organization. It has no bearing on the reality of the world we currently live in. You might say that. And then you see the citations up there. Mary Koss initially did this study of over 6,000 college students in 1987. Mary Koss is definitely a feminist. I don't know if she'd call herself a radical left-wing feminist, and that was 30 years ago. Then you'd see the next citation, the U.S. Justice Department in the year 2000. Now I assume we have many different political views in the room, and I think that's awesome. Can we all agree, though, that in the year 2000, the U.S. Justice Department was not a left-wing radical feminist organization? Can we be on the same page about that? Some of you wish it was, some of you wish it wasn't, but we can all agree it wasn't, okay? And then you see the U.S. Centers for Disease Control in 2011, just 6 years ago. And what we see is this comes up in national study and national study and national study and national study for the past 30 years, and also campus-based studies as well, when they're done right. So what we see is this has been the reality for the past 30 years. We like to think we live in a society that is progressing and getting better and better all the time, and in so many ways that is true. But when it comes to this issue, not only is there no evidence of progress, there's actually evidence of no progress. When we accept that 1 in 4 college women might experience sexual assault or attempted sexual assault, then the next thing we might explain it away is we might say, wow, there must be all these sociopaths who are mentally ill and can't tell the difference between right and wrong, who are hiding out in the bushes and smell bad and violently attack people, and I'm just not hearing about it. And that does happen, but it's actually pretty rare, particularly in college campuses. What we know is of these women who experience sexual violence, 84% of them knew their attacker. So it wasn't a stranger in the bushes. It was their homecoming date. It was their lab partner. It was their friend who offered to walk them to their car. Now, we all want to believe in the stranger in the bushes. We want to believe in that myth. Because if you're afraid of sexual violence happening to you, it's scary, but it's pretty easy to avoid, right? Like, don't walk alone at night, avoid bushes. You're good, right? And if you're worried that you might perpetrate sexual violence, you just go, well, I'm not a sociopath, I don't hang out in bushes, I'm good, right? It's much more complicated than that. Once we recognize that most of these women knew their perpetrators, then we start to get a different image. We start to get an image of a charming, good-looking, really smart guy who lures women into these situations and as soon as he gets them alone, violently attacks them. And that does happen. But it's also a very small percentage of the perpetrators. What we know is, of the college men who admitted to behavior that was sexual assault, and we don't say, are you a rapist? Because we all know how to answer that on a survey we're going to turn into people, right? We said, have you ever done this, 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 or this? A list of 10 things that all met the legal definition of sexual assault. And of the college men who said, yep, I've done one or more of those things, 84% of them did not describe what they had done as illegal. Now, some of you maybe were out in the hallway saying to yourself or saying to your friend, why do I have to go to this? Rape's bad. I'm on board. Rapists should go to jail. They should be convicted. I'm on board. Why do I have to go to this? Because that's what 84% of the men who committed sexual violence on college campuses said too. They said sexual violence is bad. I would never do that. And then they go out and they engage in behavior that is actually sexually violent. Our challenge here is not to teach you what sexual violence is and tell you not to do it. You all know that. Not a single one of you wants to perpetrate sexual violence. I believe that. But sexual violence still happens. The challenge is not the stranger in the bushes or the jerk. The challenge on a college campus in particular is a well-meaning, well-intentioned guy who's looking to hook up and have sex the way he's been taught his whole life. The problem is with how we as a culture have taught him to hook up and have sex his whole entire life. We literally teach people to rape other people. We just don't call it that. We call it playing the game, we call it getting some, we call it all sorts of different things. So our challenge here is not to educate you what sexual violence is. Our challenge here is to help you unlearn all the messed up messages you've received to this point in your life. And every one of us has that unlearning to do, including me. We are very well miseducated by our culture. And someone who doesn't understand what they're doing is sexual violence but perpetrates it anyway does not absolve themselves of any responsibility or accountability. I would argue just the opposite. One of these perpetrators might say something like this. Although I truly believe this encounter between us was consensual, I recognize now that she did not and does not view this incident the same way that I did. What he's saying is, at the time that this happened, I was totally into it. It was awesome. And now, a month, 3 months, a year later, he's saying, I understand today that not only did she not consider it consensual now, she didn't consider it consensual then. And if she didn't consider it consensual then, that is the very definition of sexual assault. And this is often what I hear when I investigate sexual violence on college campuses. Someone will say they've experienced sexual violence. I will meet with them, often to almost always a woman, and she will say, this is what happened to me, this is how it played out, I didn't want this to happen, I didn't give consent, here's how I didn't give consent. And I'll say, thank you for sharing that with me. Often a very difficult conversation to have. And then I will meet with the person she said sexually assaulted her. Almost always a man. And he will say this to me, Keith, believe me, I'll tell you every detail to the best of my memory, and when you hear what happened between us, there's no way you or anybody else could possibly describe what happened between us as sexual harassment, sexual assault, or rape based on everything I've learned my whole life. The problem is everything he learned his whole entire life. And it is heartbreaking to see someone go through a process and realize something they thought was fine that happened 6 months or a year earlier to realize was actually without consent, was actually sexual violence. And no one wants to be here and realize that something they did is actually sexual harassment, sexual assault, or rape. No one wants to be in this position. And someone who's experienced sexual violence is never reassured to find out their perpetrator didn't mean it. In fact, that can often escalate the hurt and the pain and the trauma that someone experiences. And so our job as a community is to make sure that no one ends up here and no one ends up over here. We want to prevent that from happening. We don't want to help them understand it a year later. We want to prevent it from happening in the first place for both of them. Because they're often both members of our community. They're often both our friends. And we don't want either one of them to be in that situation. So we have to really understand these dynamics. We have to really understand, we have to unlearn the messed up information and really understand what is making out, hooking up, having sex, and what is sexual harassment, sexual assault, and rape. Now this is challenging. I speak on about 25 college campuses about this every year. And no one has ever come up to me and said, "You're the dude who's going to talk later, right?" Yes, that's me. Great. Awesome. We're all so glad you're here. Could you tell us what the difference is between sex and rape? We're all super confused. That'd be super helpful. No one has ever asked me to do that. The reason no one has ever asked me to do that is because we are so well miseducated. We think we know. We have a lot of unlearning to do. And so we do have to talk about what is the difference between making out or hooking up or having sex or sexual harassment, sexual assault, and rape. And the difference very simply is informed consent. If you have informed consent, that it is making out, it is hooking up, it is having sex, and if not, it is sexual harassment, sexual assault, or rape. Simple term, informed consent. That's the only difference. Oh. So I want to break this down. I'll talk just about consent. When we talk about consent, consent is, at every step of the way, affirmative consent that is freely given. So I want to break this down. At every step of the way, how many of you are familiar with the baseball analogy for making out and hooking up? First base, second base, third base? Only that many? Okay. How many of you are familiar with the baseball analogy? Okay, that's better. All right. Now, what I've learned in my time is that we all have very different definitions for what happens at these bases, particularly second and third. But whatever you think happens at second and third base will totally work for this, right? At every step of the way means we have to get consent at every step of the way. You have to get consent to kiss, you have to get to touch, you have to get consent to take clothes off, you have to get consent for everything you do along the way, right? Does that make sense? So in our baseball analogy, you can't hit a single and then go stand on third base. You're going to be out. That's how baseball works. Right? Make sense? Now, as explained, this is not controversial, this is not radical, this is not complicated. We have to get consent at every step of the way, right? As explained this, one guy raised his hand and says, "Wait a minute. Why would someone make out with me if they didn't want to have sex with me?" And I said, "Oh boy. Seriously? Seriously." I said, "There could be like a million reasons, like a million reasons, like a million reasons." And I sounded like Lady Gaga. And he says, "I can't think of one." I said, "I can think of 4. And he goes, "Great." I said, "Maybe she never wanted to have sex with you. She just wanted to make out with you. She just likes going around, making out with people, never wants to take it further. We call that the kissing bandit." Do you have those here? Don't point. Don't point. Don't point. That's not helpful. Some of you are like, "That's me. I'd love that." And if that's consensual, then if that's what you want to do, that's great. There's no problem with that, right? He said, "No, she was really into me." I was like, "All right." I said, "Maybe she's worried you have an STD and she didn't want to get it from you." And he said, "No, not me," which is what everybody with an STD says. Right? Everybody. I said, "Okay, well, maybe she has an STD and she didn't want to give it to you, and that is super generous." And he said, "No, she was really hot. And those things aren't related in any way whatsoever." That's not how that works, just so we're clear. That's not how that works, right? And then I said, well, maybe she did want to have sex with you, but then she made out with you and decided she didn't want to have sex with you anymore. He's like, "No, I'm good at that." His friends were like, "It's the 4th one for sure. We've seen it. There's a lot of saliva involved. It's messy. It's not good. It's not good. It's the 4th one for sure." The point is, I have no idea why someone would make out with you and not want to have sex with you, because there's like literally a million reasons, right? There's an infinite amount of reasons. And I'm annoyed with people who use the word literally wrong. There's literally like a million reasons, okay? Now, when I say we have to get consent at every step of the way, that makes perfect sense. And when he says, "I've learned that if someone makes out with me, they're agreeing to whatever else comes after that," if we're honest, he's not the only one who's learned that. We may have learned it the way he has, but we've learned other things, that if someone agrees to this, then they're agreeing to whatever comes after that. And that's not true. That's not accurate. We have to get consent at every step of the way, every time. And people are going to be free to change their minds. We have to get consent at every step of the way. Okay? So consent is at every step of the way. There's also affirmative consent. And affirmative consent is a really simple thing that you all already understand. Now, let's illustrate this. How many of you are familiar with stoplights? Just come on. All right, good. I don't want to assume. I grew up in a town of 89 people. We didn't have a stoplight, but I'd heard of them. Okay? So we're going to do this together now. Affirmative consent is like a stoplight. When you come to a stoplight, red means? Green means? Yellow means? Go really fast. Go really fast. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Some of you curse in the middle of that, and you're my friends. So every single one of you knows the right answer, which is slow down and proceed with caution. There's nobody who doesn't know that's what a yellow light means, right? And somewhere along the way, someone taught you, driver's ed teacher, older sibling, maybe your parents, something else, right? And you all know the right answer. You all know that yellow means slow down and proceed with caution. And when you're busy and you're late and you're in a hurry and you see a yellow light, what's the voice in your head say? Gun it, I can make it, punch it, hit it, Margaret, whatever, right? Right? That's what comes up in your head, right? And you know that's not the right answer. You know that. But what do? Right? This is exactly what we teach people about hooking up and having sex. Exactly. We think we teach people that if someone says no or stop, that's a red light and you can't proceed. It's not really what we teach people. We'll come back to that later. But if we did, that would be true. And we teach people that if you come to a green light and both people are in agreement and they communicate that, that's a green light and that's totally cool. And that's absolutely true. And we all know that if we come to a yellow light and it's been silent or ambiguous or unclear and we're at a yellow light, we all know we should slow down and figure out what's going on there, right? We should slow down and proceed with caution. But what we really teach people is to go really fast. We teach people things like go for it before their friends come back, go for it before their parents come home, go for it before they change their mind, go for it before they sober up. And not a single one of those things is consent. We tell people that sexual violence is when someone has said no or stop, and that's a terrible definition. The accurate definition is anything other than a green light is not consent. You have to have a yes. A red light is not consent, and neither is a yellow light. If you're in a hookup situation and you say, hey, I'd really like to do this with you, and someone goes, yeah, no. I don't know what that means. I don't know if that means maybe, let me think about it, maybe next week. No, I'm not interested. I'm not interested in that with you. Indigestion, I have no idea what that means. No idea, right? Or maybe someone says yes, but you don't know what they've said yes to. Did they say yes to this, but not that? You don't know. So if you're at a yellow light in a hookup situation, you just need to slow down and proceed with caution. It doesn't mean your night's over. It means you need to communicate with the person you want to hook up with. And some of you are thinking, you want me to communicate with people I want to hook up with? You're going to ruin my love life. No, I'm not. Communication with the person you want to hook up with is the only thing that makes it a green light. It's the only thing that makes it possible. Not only does communication make it possible, it also makes it much more enjoyable. People who hook up know this. If you don't communicate, it's a freaking disaster, right? You go to kiss and you bump teeth and now you both got a headache. You go to caress and you end up tickling and now it's really weird to come back from, right? All sorts of things can go wrong in that. But that's not what we see in TV and movies, right? I'm not talking about porn. That's a whole nother level of objectification, degradation, violence, tricks, all sorts of nonsense. I'm talking about like PG-13 movies. I'm talking about like TV shows you see on at 9 o'clock at night, right? What we see in these things is when people are really in love or really hot for each other, they know what the other person's thinking. And that's not how that works, right? Let me know if this sounds familiar to you. This is what I see over and over. Let me know if this sounds familiar. Someone walks in the room and their eyes lock. The lights go down, the candles come on, great music with a good bass line comes in. And because they're so in love or so in lust, they just know what the other person thinks and they glide across the room towards each other. They don't walk, they glide across the room towards each other. They have a beautiful, passionate kiss because they just know what the other person is thinking. And without saying a word, they glide, they don't walk to the bedroom where there's great backlighting so you get a silhouette but no nipple because that would make it rated R. Anybody seen this? Anybody seen this? You're familiar, right? You're familiar because there's a million examples of this, right? This is what we see over and over and over. Let me tell you this. It's complete science fiction. Total science fiction. That's not how that works at all. For that to happen in my house, a few things have to happen. One, I have to install a dimmer switch. That's hard. Okay? Two, the playlist, an iPhone makes that way easier than it used to be. I got to light a whole bunch of candles at the right time. Now, I'll just tell you, if you have ever thought about lighting a whole bunch of candles at just the right time to create a romantic or sexy moment, let me just tell you 3 things. 1, that's a fire hazard and dangerous. Okay? 2, it's a high-risk maneuver, right? You can get that wrong one of 2 ways. 1, you're halfway lighting a whole bunch of candles, that person walks in, and you just look incompetent like you don't know what you're doing, okay? Not usually sexy. Or you light all those candles. That person's delayed, they stop at the grocery store, they're running late, you're hanging out, they come home. Now you're just a partially dressed person in a really hot, well-lit room, and you're sweaty and gross. Most people aren't into that. Some people are, most people aren't, right? So you got to get that just right, I'm just saying. And Fire hazard. Also, I have to install some sort of conveyor belt system so we glide but don't walk. I'm not doing that. That's beyond my competency. Now, the backlighting I can do. I mean, that's a lamp and a curtain. I'm not totally useless. I can pull that off, right? You know what else is total science fiction? That two people would care about each other or be hot for each other and then know what the other person is thinking. It doesn't work like that. Raise your hands if your parents are still together. You think they have any idea what the other is thinking like 80, 90% of the time? Look at you, they're like, nope, right? My parents were divorced when I was 9. I can't imagine they ever knew what the other person was thinking, right? But the myth is, if you care about someone, you know what they're thinking. It just doesn't work that way. So we have to communicate at every step of the way. And that communication needs to be affirmative consent. And affirmative consent can be simple as, yes, I'd love to. That would be great. That's all clear affirmative consent. And you can get affirmative consent by just asking, is this okay with you? What would you like to do next? I'd love to do this. Are you up for that? Those are all ways to ask for and ways you can get consent. It's not very complicated. We all understand what yes is and what no's are. And if you're not sure, you're at a yellow light, and then you just need to ask again. I'm not really sure what you just said yes to. Did you mean this or this? Or both? Cool, great. So at every step of the way, we have to have affirmative consent, and that consent also needs to be freely given, okay? Now, freely given means without coercion. We often think about coercion as a gun to the head or a knife to the throat, because that's what we see on TV and movies. Exceedingly rare on college campuses. But coercion of other kinds does happen. I want to talk about my daughters, who are 7 and 5. They're very cute, which is called a survival mechanism. They love Frozen. How many of you love Frozen? Every time. A bunch of women are like, yeah, I love Frozen. And there's a bunch of dudes who are like, screw it. Yeah, I do. I love Frozen. Yeah, it's awesome. Right? So these two, when the youngest, they love Frozen, they love Elsa because she has a blue dress, high heels, and magical superpowers, right? So they love Elsa. And when the little sister, Nina, has the Elsa wand and the older sister, Kara, wants it, she knows she just can't go up and grab it from her because in our house, as you might imagine, consent's pretty important. So she knows she needs to ask for it and get it back. Let me tell you what that looks like. Hey, Nina, can I have it? Nina, come here. Nina, give it to me. Nina, please. Come on. Nina, come on. Nina, please. Yes, thank you. Now, is that freely given? No. Right? That's consent, but it's not freely given, right? And so, in order for consent to be valid, someone has to be able to make another choice. If you're not able to say no, then you're not really giving consent. So we don't often see violent threats on college campuses, but we do see coercion of another kind. I'll give you 4 examples from one campus in a year, real-life examples. Standing in front of a door. Sure, I'll let you leave the room as soon as you make out with me. Not freely given. Yeah, I'll help you with your lab homework as soon as you go down on me. Not freely given. If you don't have sex with me, I'll post to the first year Facebook group that you did have sex with me. Not freely given. If you don't keep having sex with me, I'll take the video I made that you didn't know about of us having sex last week and I'll send it home to your family. Not freely given. Those are all real-world examples. They're not consensual. And if you're agreeing to consent under threat, it is not consent. So to review, we wanted every step of the way affirmative consent that is freely given. And this consent also must be informed consent. An informed consent is a simple legal term that says someone must be able to make an informed decision for it to be valid. There's a few situations in which a person cannot make an informed decision. If you're 9 years old, you cannot give informed consent. If you're unconscious or asleep, you cannot give informed consent. If you've been drugged, you cannot give informed consent. If you're developmentally disabled, you cannot give informed consent. And if you're highly intoxicated, you cannot give informed consent. Now that makes perfect sense up until that last one. I said 9 years old and a bunch of you cringed, which is the perfect reaction. But you can't give informed consent if you're highly intoxicated. Raise your hand if you've ever known someone who's had sex after they've been drinking. Now, does that mean we all know perpetrators and we all know survivors? I think that's true. I just don't think that's the best indicator. Now, we all know people who've had sex after they've been drinking. I know what some of you are thinking. My parents, the one time that ever happened. Unless you have siblings, then both times, obviously they've been drinking, right? And now it's weird because you're in an auditorium with a whole bunch of other people thinking about your parents having sex. You did that, not me. You're the weird ones, not me, just so we're clear, right? Now, Can someone have something to drink and be able to make an informed decision? Absolutely. Can someone have so much to drink that they're no longer able to make an informed decision? Absolutely. And this makes perfect sense when we think about it in other realms. It's a little complicated when it comes to hooking up because our culture conflates alcohol and hooking up all the time, right? So we have some confusing messages there. But if we take it out of that context, this makes perfect sense. If I get wasted this evening and go down to a car dealership and try and buy a car and I slur my speech and I stumble around the lot, they can't sell me a car. Even if I say, yes, I would love to buy the pretty red one. They can't sell me that car because I'm not able to make an informed decision. And if they were to sell me that vehicle knowing that I was highly intoxicated, that would be illegal, it would be unethical, it would be immoral, right? If I can't agree to buy a car, I can't agree to engage in sexual activity with someone else. I'm not able to make an informed decision. Right? Similarly, if I get really intoxicated and I go to a bar, I get really intoxicated, and I leave that bar, and someone else who I was there with is also really intoxicated, and he starts walking home, and I get in my car, and I hit him with my car, I can't say, hey, I was pretty drunk. You can't hold me responsible for what I did. I'm responsible. I also can't blame him. He was pretty drunk. He was walking kind of funny, so what do you want me to do? No, because I hit him with my car, I'm responsible for what happened, right? And this is the same thing when it comes to hooking up. If someone cannot make an informed decision, no matter what they say, that's invalid. The trouble is, our culture teaches us, if you're interested in someone and they're not interested in you, buy them another drink. We teach that alcohol is how you get consent, when the reality is alcohol can make consent impossible to get. So if you're in a situation where you might want to hook up with someone, and you or they or both have been drinking, you're in a very precarious situation. And let's be honest, this is often the situation, right? Because the alcohol scene and the hookup scene are often the very same scene. Whether it's a party or a bar or other things, it's often conflated. Not everybody who's drinking wants to have sex. Not everybody wants to have sex is drinking, but it's often the same scene. So if you or the person you want to hook up with have been drinking, or both, you're in a very precarious situation, right? If they've been drinking, they may not be able to give consent. They may be so intoxicated they're unable to give informed consent no matter what they say. And if you've been drinking, you may not be clear about asking for consent or interpreting whether you have it. And you may not be a good judge of how intoxicated they are. I don't know about you, but when I'm drunk, I don't have a good sense of how drunk I am, let alone how drunk other people are, right? So it's a very precarious situation. Thankfully, you live in the greatest time ever to be alive. I really believe that. And you have technology that can help you resolve this issue. Do you know what this is? It's your cell phone. If it's 2 o'clock in the morning and you've been drinking, or the person you want to hook up with has been drinking, just say, hey, I'd really like to get to know you better. Could I get your number? Get their number, go home, sleep it off, wake up, have a really great breakfast, and at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, when you're no longer hungover, you can text them. You don't even have to talk to them. You can just text them. You can get together and have all the crazy sex you want to have. I think it's cheap and meaningless. I hope you're safe about it, but you get to make those decisions as a grown-up. But at 2 o'clock in the morning, when you or they or both have been drinking, you may not be able to make those decisions. So it's a very precarious situation. So we have to make sure we navigate those situations ourselves effectively. We also need to make sure when we see these situations that other people are, that we intervene. You've seen two people who are really intoxicated making out with each other. Stop throwing popcorn at them, go over and intervene. You seem really into each other, this is not going to happen, you're both too intoxicated. Why don't you go home with them, why don't you go home here? Let's make sure that nothing happens, right? Or you see someone at the party who's just not taking no for an answer. Come home with me, come home with me, come home with me, come on home with me. Intervene. Say, dude, this is not happening. Your listening skills are poor. This is not happening. Or you can walk over and spill a drink. Oh, I'm so sorry, I'm such a klutz. Well, let's get you to the bathroom, we'll get you cleaned up and get those people separated. Or you can say, hey, I'm worried about what's happening over here. Will you come talk to them with me? Help me out. You might call security, you might call the police, you might ask the bartender. There's lots of ways you can do that. Or you can say, dude, your car's getting towed. He will be out the door and a block and a half away before he realizes, I don't own a car. And in that time, you've resolved the situation. There are lots of ways to do this. Or maybe someone's just passed out on the couch in a vulnerable position. Get them somewhere safe so that sexual violence doesn't happen to them. And in those situations, you get to intervene when sexual violence is imminent. And if you get to do that, you're a hero. Is that going to be awkward to do? Yeah, but you're college students. Awkward's like your superpower. Use it, right? Now is it going to be awkward? Sure, but if you see something that's concerning and you don't intervene because this is going to be a little awkward, and I told you the next morning that what you saw that worried you, that you didn't speak up about, led to one person sexually assaulting the other, wouldn't you do anything to go back in time and say something and be a little bit awkward? I think every single one of you would do that. We don't have that technology, so you have to do that in the moment. I'm worried, I'm concerned, I'm going to say something. It doesn't have to be pretty, you don't have to get it perfect, you don't have to get it right every time, but just something. And if you get a chance to intervene when sexual violence is imminent, you're a hero. Now, the reason why we have to talk about informed consent and what is sex and what is rape, as silly as that seems, is because we're all so well miseducated. Every single one of us, myself included. We are so well miseducated by the rape culture. The rape culture is the culture around us. Rape culture is the culture around us that encourages, condones, and teaches, particularly men, to rape particularly women. Rape culture is very heteronormative, it is very heterosexist, but it is also the roots of sexual violence that happens against gay, lesbian, and queer folks, trans folks, people in the same gender. It is the roots of all sexual violence. The rape culture is around us all the time. If you've never noticed the rape culture, it's not because it's not there, it's because it's everywhere and you've stopped noticing it. The four key components of the rape culture that I want to talk about is the objectification of women, subordinating women's intelligence, capability, and humanity, defining masculinity in poor ways, and intersecting forms of oppression. I have examples of each one of these. I'm going to share with you these examples. I want to give you the heads up. These are graphic and descriptive examples. You might be offended, you might be hurt, you might find them funny. But I'm going to show you examples and unpack how these examples encourage, condone, and teach sexual violence to happen. Okay? This first example is this Nikon camera ad. Nikon made this ad with these two very youngly depicted women in a hypersexual situation. We see these women as nothing more than objects in this ad, and when we get used to seeing women depicted in ads, TV shows, movies, song lyrics, conversations in the dining hall over and over and over again as nothing more than sexual objects, sooner or later, for some men, it's going to get a little bit easier to treat women like objects, and that can lead to sexual violence. We might ask ourselves, why would Nikon, trying to sell cameras, use this ad? Well, they're bragging about their technology, which can detect up to 12 faces. And you see the two faces they've highlighted. You'll also see the others here, 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 and here, hiding behind the curtain. Nikon made an ad bragging about their technology that can detect the faces of other people watching that these two women don't know about, which is not consensual, which is sexual violence. Now, many of you probably saw this ad, didn't notice it, didn't pay attention, and that's how the rape culture works. We learn these messages and we don't even realize we're learning them. This is a t-shirt being sold on college campuses, Mike's Hawk's Taxidermy, I'll Stuff Your Beaver. This is how we subordinate women's intelligence, capability, and humanity. It's not that we as men are incapable of viewing women in their full humanity. It's that the culture teaches us not to, and sometimes we fall in line with that. You'll notice this on a warm, beautiful day like today, when someone walks across campus and some guy will yell something demeaning and degrading to that person, which is sexual harassment, let's be clear. And 10 minutes later, his friends will be giving him a hard time. He will say, "Do not ever speak about my mother that way." See, for him, his mother maintains her intelligence, capability, and humanity, but he chose not to see that in the woman who walked across campus. And although that can be hurtful and even traumatizing for her to experience, I think it says far more about his humanity than it does about hers. In this example, an Abercrombie & Fitch t-shirt, an homage to the Dukes of Hazzard, this t-shirt is objectifying of men and women. It's a men's t-shirt. It doesn't talk about I love women. It says I love cooter, so we're only talking about women as their pieces and parts. And it's a men's t-shirt, so it's objectifying as men, because it doesn't say I love cooter. It says Boss Hog or my really large penis loves cooter. Now, one of the things you're going to come to learn in life, if you haven't learned it already, is that anyone who wears a t-shirt referring to their very large penis or constantly talks about their very large penis, as a general rule, some of you learned this already, not going to have a very large penis. That's the way the world works. I don't make the rules, it's just how it happens. Although I'm pretty sure any guy who would wear this t-shirt is a pretty big dick, but not in the way that he meant. This is how we as a culture define masculinity as sexual conquest. We teach men, all men, there are very narrow and rigid boundaries of how you're allowed to think, feel, and behave, and not think, feel, and behave. We all know those rules, whether we're men or not. And those of us who are men know those rules, and we've known them our whole life. When I research college men, I say, when did you first learn these rules? They say, I've known these as long as I can remember. They don't remember learning them because they've always been part of their consciousness. It is so well ingrained in our culture about how men are allowed to think, feel, and behave, and not think, feel, and behave. And when I interview college men, you know what they tell me? I know those rules, absolutely. And they would rattle off things that we would all, don't cry, don't be emotional, be strong, be the breadwinner, be responsible, don't wear pink, right? We all know those rules. And the men I interview, this is what they tell me. But that's not me. I know it comes naturally to everybody else, but here's my secret. That's not me. I don't really fit in that box. So what I do is I pretend. I fake it, I put on a performance, I wear a mask. I wear a mask to cover up who I really am that won't be seen as man enough. And I wear a mask to portray an image to you that you will see as man enough. And you know what happens when we put on a mask and we do a performance to not be who we really are, to prove our manhood according to society's toxic, harmful, and damaging expectations? It leads to sexual violence. It leads to inauthenticity and loss of humanity for ourselves. It leads to damaging relationships. It leads to so much harm in our culture, to women, to trans folks, and to us as men ourselves. Despite all our concrete and real privileges in this world, we as men die younger, higher rates of heart attack, higher rates of depression, higher rates of suicide, because we're trying to live up to these toxic definitions about what it means to be a man. You can see this on a playground with 5-year-old boys. One 5-year-old boy throws the ball, doesn't go very far. The other 5-year-old boy says, man, you throw like a, which is misogynistic, because if being a girl wasn't bad, that wouldn't be very effective. The boy who just got called a girl feels emasculated and needs to get his manhood back. A 5-year-old boy feels like he needs to prove his manhood. And so he maybe yells a homophobic slur back at that person, which he doesn't even know is homophobic, because he's 5 years old. He doesn't understand that term or oppression or violence. But if 2 5-year-old boys know that when you're insecure about your manhood because of how far you can throw a ball, try and get your manhood back by calling someone else gay or a girl, imagine how good we are by the time we end up here at calling each other gay or a girl to prop up our own insecurities about who we are as men. And if we've been doing it since we're 5 years old, imagine how we have to constantly escalate the aggression and how we call each other gay or a girl for it to still prove our own manhood. You see examples of this around you every single day, don't you? We have to break free from these toxic definitions. If you're a man, be who you are, in your full genuineness, in your full authenticity, connected to your full humanity. As soon as you stop living up to someone else's, your dad's, your mom's, your uncle's, the news, the media, if you stop living up to someone else's expectations of who you are, life gets magical. It's liberating. Your relationships will open up. Your sense of who you are will open up. And you'll move through the world in a way that makes it better for every single person. So give it up and be who you are. And finally, intersecting forms of oppression. One of the ways these intersecting forms of oppression function is to emasculate men. One of the ways that racism tries to function is it tries to emasculate men of color. One of the ways classism functions tries to emasculate working class men because of the status of their job, the car they drive, the clothes they wear. These forms of oppression emasculate these men, and then those men, same things those 2 5-year-old boys on the playground turn to. Misogyny and homophobia to prove their manhood, or sexual conquest. One participant was on a football team at a Division I school, and the star quarterback with NFL prospects came into the locker room, bragging to everyone in the locker room about how he'd hooked up with a girl the night before, they'd had sex, they went to sleep, they woke up in the morning, they had sex again, she left, he didn't even know her name. Isn't that awesome? He's high-fiving all around the locker room, bragging about it. Everybody leaves except for his best friend. His best friend says, dude, what are you doing? And the star quarterback with the NFL prospects says, I don't know what I'm doing. I didn't want to be with her. I wasn't interested in her at all. My girlfriend's going to find out. She's definitely going to leave me sooner or later. I don't know how to handle the draft and everything that's coming up in my life. Without her, I depend on her so much. Why do I keep doing this stuff? There's powerful messages here. One, if you're hooking up with someone and you don't know their name, I'm curious about the conversation you had around consent. I'm skeptical. Two, if you don't know someone's name, it's at least demeaning and degrading. If you're having demeaning and degrading sex with someone so you can brag about it, demeaning and degrading sex you don't even want to have so you can brag about it to a locker room of 100 men, that's messed up. You need therapy. You need help. And three, if the star quarterback with NFL prospects doesn't feel man enough and has to hook up with people he doesn't want to hook up with to prove his manhood, what about the rest of us? We can't care about sexism and not care about racism. We can't care about racism and not care about homophobia. We can't care about homophobia and not care about anti-Semitism because they all intersect and they all reinforce each other. If you challenge rape jokes or sexist comments, you also need to challenge racist comments. You also need to challenge the homophobic things people say in the locker room or the dining room or the classroom because they all contribute to sexual violence and they all contribute to lots of harm to every single one of us. If we're really going to be effective at ending rape, we not only need to address sexual violence when it's imminent, the people making out at the party, the person who won't take no for an answer, the person passed out, we need to speak up at the roots of sexual violence. If you intervene when sexual violence is imminent, you're a hero. But to be honest, you're not going to have a lot of chances to do that. Maybe once in your college experience, maybe once a year, maybe more than that. But you have the opportunity to intervene at the roots of sexual violence every single day if you're paying attention. To intervene in the objectifying comment, in the screensaver for someone's computer, in the poster they have up on their wall, in the language that they're using. To intervene when someone subordinates someone's intelligence, capability, and humanity, when someone repeats things that reinforce bad messages about what it means to be a man or other intersecting forms of oppression. Those things are around us all the time, and if you're not seeing them, start paying attention. We can intervene when sexual violence is imminent, and we can intervene at the roots of sexual violence. When I do this, I often get asked this question: why is it that you're doing this? If you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. If you are come here because our liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. I tell people I do this for 3 reasons: the potential survivors I know, the potential survivors I'll never know, and the men, including myself. The potential survivors I know, I mentioned my daughters, my partner, my mother, my sister, men I know, trans folks I know. I don't want anybody I know and care about to experience sexual violence. But too often we say to college men in particular, hey guys, think about the 4 women you love and care about. Think about your mother, your grandmother, your sister, and your girlfriend. Think about 1 in 4. Think about having one of them. And if that helps you care about this issue for the first time, then you run with that. But I'm offended by that approach for 2 reasons. 1, it assumes we as men all have girlfriends, and that's heterosexist and part of the problem, not part of the solution. 2, it says, I assume you as men to be so emotionally dead inside, the only way you could possibly care about sexual violence happening is if it happens to one of the 4 women you love and care about. And as a man, I know that's not true. Every single one of us is fully capable of caring about sexual violence, whether it happens to people we love and care about, friends, acquaintances, people in our community that we've never met, people in Detroit or Minneapolis or Juarez, Mexico or Afghanistan. Anytime sexual violence happens, we can care about it. And anytime sexual violence happens, too much of it is done in my name because I do not speak up and stand up as often as I could or as often as I should. 20 years ago, when I was a college student, Cornel West spoke at my campus. He was there to speak about race and racism, and he ended his talk by saying he wasn't optimistic, but he was hopeful. He explained that optimism required evidence and required data, and when it came to racism and race, at that time he was not optimistic because the data wasn't good. But he remained hopeful. That hope is a spiritual leap of faith that says, I believe we can join together and create a world that is better than it is today by speaking out and taking a stand. When it comes to sexual violence, I feel the same way. I can't be optimistic because the data isn't good. That number has not changed in 30 years of research. But I remain so hopeful because we can change our communities. You can change this community here. Don't wait for the administration to do it. Don't wait for politicians to do it. Don't wait for somebody else to do it. No one has more power to influence and change this community than those of you who are sitting here and your friends who are not here. You've been an awesome audience. You've been really engaged, and I'm really grateful. But here's my secret. I'm not here to talk to you. I'm here to talk to all the people you're going to talk to. If each one of you left here, talked to 5 people in the next 24 hours, you could reach a critical mass of this campus community. If each of you left here and talked to 10 people in the next 2 days, we could cover just about the entire campus community. You, yourselves, have the power to do that. You know how much you're paying attention to what everybody else says. Never doubt the power of your own voice and the influence that you can make, the change that you can make, just as you go through your daily life in your sphere of influence. And if you do that, you can change the culture here on this campus, and the communities that you're a part of, and the communities that you'll be a part of for the rest of your life. So in the words of Cornel West, I'm not optimistic, but I am so hopeful because of the difference you're going to make.
Thank you, Keith, for your continued work to address complex problems like sexual violence on university campuses. Unfortunately, as you've talked about, this continues to be an issue decades after it was first identified publicly. Also, unfortunately, we know that Augustana is not immune to sexual violence and other serious concerns. The University of Alberta recently has developed a sexual violence strategy that works to prevent sexual violence from happening on our campuses and also to provide support for anyone who may have survived it. Please take a look at a variety of resources that are available to you through the University of Alberta, specific to the Augustana campus, as well as available to you on North Campus. Your course e-class, as well as the MyU Alberta app, has a range of services available, as well as more information to help you better understand sexual violence, as well as how best to support someone if they disclose sexual violence to you. It's not possible to leave a presentation like this unaffected. I'm not going to try and name the range of emotions or thoughts that you may be having, but just want to let you know that those services are available to you. As you reflect on this presentation, I'd like you to think about a couple of things. First, how did this presentation impact you? What is something that maybe you learned or thought of for the first time about sexual violence? And second, what is a practical, proactive step that you could take to reduce the likelihood of sexual violence happening at Augustana or elsewhere? Once again, thank you, Dr. Keith Edwards, for challenging us, but also giving us some hope on what we can do. We look forward to continuing this conversation through the year, through a variety of activities, services, and presentations sponsored by Augustana Student Life and the Students Association. Thank you again for attending today's presentation, and please remember to complete the quiz and the other activity that is in your e-class. Thank you.